Can you imagine soldiers from another country marching into Washington, D.C.? Can you picture them setting fire to the most important buildings in the entire nation? It sounds like something from a movie, a wild story that could never really happen. Yet, it did. On a hot summer day, August 24, 1814, the unthinkable occurred. The new capital city of the United States, a place of hope and democratic dreams, was attacked by a foreign army. British soldiers, known as redcoats for their bright red uniforms, walked through the streets with a mission not of peace but of destruction. They were there to burn the city to the ground, and they started with the very symbols of American power. This event is a shocking chapter in American history, one that is often overlooked. We think of the White House as a fortress, a permanent and untouchable symbol of the nation, but back then it was called the President's House, and it was vulnerable. The city of Washington was young and still under construction, not the sprawling metropolis we know today. Its defenses were weak, and the American militia was no match for the experienced British army that had just defeated Napoleon in Europe. The sight of foreign troops on American soil, marching toward the heart of the government, sent a wave of panic through the small population. It was a moment of deep crisis and national humiliation. The soldiers who entered the city were led by determined commanders. They were not just a chaotic mob, they were an organized military force carrying out specific orders. Their goal was to strike a blow so powerful that it would cripple the American spirit and bring the ongoing war to a decisive end. They targeted the buildings that represented the American experiment, the Capitol, where laws were made, and the President's House, where the leader of the country lived. For the citizens who fled in terror and for the leaders who had failed to protect their capital, it was a dark and frightening day. The bright promise of the United States suddenly seemed very fragile, as though it could all go up in smoke. The world watched to see what would happen next. Would this young nation collapse under the pressure of such a devastating attack, or would it find a way to endure? The burning of Washington was more than just the destruction of buildings, it was a test of the country's will to survive. The flames that lit up the night sky on that August evening were seen for miles around, a terrible beacon of defeat. Yet, within those very flames, a different kind of fire was being forged, a fire of determination, and a renewed sense of what it meant to be American. This single shocking event would change the course of the war and the destiny of the nation itself. Why would the British do such a thing? Why travel all the way across the Atlantic Ocean just to burn a few buildings? The answer lies in one word: revenge. This was not a random act of violence. It was a direct response to something American soldiers had done a year earlier. In 1813, during the War of 1812, American forces had attacked and captured the city of York, which was the capital of Upper Canada at the time, what we now call Toronto. During that attack, they looted homes and, most importantly, burned down the Parliament buildings. This act was seen as a great insult by the British, a violation of the unwritten rules of warfare. They vowed they would one day pay the Americans back. The British leaders in charge of this mission were Major General Robert Ross and Rear Admiral George Cockburn. Ross was a respected army officer known for his professionalism, while Cockburn was a hot-tempered and aggressive naval commander who had a deep dislike for Americans. Cockburn was the driving force behind the idea of burning Washington. He wanted to make the American government feel the same pain and humiliation that the British had felt in York. He famously declared that he would go to Washington and personally sup in the President's house. Their combined forces had easily defeated the American militia at the Battle of Bladensburg, just outside the city, leaving the road to the capital wide open for their vengeful march. While the British leaders planned their attack, the American leaders were in disarray. President James Madison had fled the city, narrowly avoiding capture. His wife, the remarkable First Lady Dolley Madison, remained behind at the President's house. She was a woman known for her social grace and political savvy, often hosting parties that brought politicians from opposing sides together. But on this day, she was not a party hostess, she was the guardian of the nation's home. She understood the danger approaching, and knew she had a role to play in preserving the symbols of the young republic. Her story stands in stark contrast to the destructive mission of Ross and Cockburn. So, as the British soldiers marched closer, their motives were crystal clear. This was a calculated act of retaliation, meant to demoralize the enemy. They believed that by destroying the physical symbols of the American government, they could break the country's spirit and force it to surrender. The burning of the Parliament in York had started a cycle of revenge, and Washington, D.C., was about to become the fiery climax of that cycle. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, not just between armies, but between the forces of destruction and the quiet courage of a First Lady determined to save a piece of her nation's soul. As the sounds of cannon fire grew closer, Dolley Madison stayed calm. She was waiting for her husband, President Madison, to return, but he was still with the scattered American troops. Messengers brought her news of the American defeat, urging her to flee immediately. But Dolley refused to leave right away. She was determined to save what she could. Her focus was on one item in particular, a full-length portrait of George Washington, painted by Gilbert Stuart. To her, this painting was not just a piece of art, it was a powerful symbol of the nation's founding and the spirit of the Revolution. She knew that if the British captured it, it would be a terrible trophy of war. With the British marching into the city, time was running out. Dolley ordered the staff to take down the large painting. The frame was screwed tightly to the wall, making it impossible to remove quickly. In a moment of quick thinking, she instructed them to break the frame and get the canvas out. She entrusted the precious painting to two men from New York, who carried it away to safety just as she finally packed her own belongings and escaped in a carriage. Her bravery was extraordinary. While others fled in panic, she risked her own safety to preserve a piece of American heritage, ensuring that the image of the nation's first hero would not fall into enemy hands. Soon after Dolley's departure, the British soldiers arrived at the president's house. They walked through its empty rooms and were amazed by what they found. A grand dinner for 40 people was still set on the table, prepared for President Madison and his cabinet, who had expected to celebrate a victory. The British officers, led by Cockburn and Ross, decided to enjoy the feast themselves. They toasted to their king with the president's wine and ate the food that had been meant for their enemies. After their mock celebration was over, they carried out their orders. They piled up the elegant furniture, broke windows, and prepared to set the house ablaze. With torches in hand, they set fire to the president's house. The flames quickly engulfed the sandstone building, turning it into a roaring inferno. The fire spread throughout the city. The British also burned the Capitol building, destroying the Library of Congress and its valuable collection of books. They torched the Treasury building and other government offices. The sky glowed red as the heart of the American government was reduced to smoldering ruins. For the British, it was a moment of triumph and revenge. For Americans watching from afar, it was a night of utter despair. The president's house, the symbol of the executive branch, was now just a blackened, empty shell. Just as it seemed the entire city would be destroyed, something incredible happened. The weather, which had been hot and humid all day, suddenly changed. The sky turned black, the wind began to howl, and a massive thunderstorm, some even described it as a hurricane or tornado, descended upon Washington. Torrential rain poured from the sky, dousing many of the fires that the British had so carefully set. The powerful winds were so strong that they ripped roofs off buildings and knocked down British soldiers. The storm was so violent that it actually caused more casualties for the British than the fighting had. It seemed to many Americans like an act of divine intervention, a storm of providence sent to save their capital. The storm threw the British plans into chaos. Their mission of destruction was cut short by the forces of nature. Fearing that the enraged American survivors might regroup and launch a counterattack, and with their forces battered by the storm, Major General Ross ordered a retreat. The British soldiers, wet and exhausted, slipped out of the ruined city under the cover of darkness, leaving behind a scene of devastation. They had occupied the American capital for only about 26 hours, but in that short time, they had left an indelible scar. The president's house was a gutted wreck, its white walls blackened by smoke, and the Capitol was a hollowed-out ruin. In the aftermath, Americans were faced with a choice. Some politicians argued that the Capitol should be moved to another safer city. They saw the ruins as a sign of failure. But a stronger feeling emerged from the ashes, a sense of defiant patriotism. The attack did not break the American spirit, it strengthened it. Leaders like President Madison were determined to rebuild, to show the world that the United States could not be so easily defeated. The decision was made to repair the Capitol and, most importantly, to restore the president's house. This act of rebuilding became a powerful symbol of national resilience and hope for the future. The blackened sandstone walls of the president's house were eventually repaired and painted a brilliant white to cover the scorch marks from the fire. This is when it truly became known as the White House. The building rose again, more beautiful than before, a testament to the nation's ability to endure its darkest hour. The burning of Washington was a humiliating event, but it ultimately fueled a stronger sense of national identity and unity. It taught Americans that their democracy was something precious that needed to be defended. The White House, once a victim of war, was transformed into an enduring symbol of American strength, survival, and the unbreakable promise of a nation reborn from fire.